All right, ladies and gents, I've got Dr. Ted Naiman on for the third time today. Great to have you here again, my man.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. Great to talk to you. Love what you're doing.
Absolute pleasure to have you on again. Like I said off air, right, we've covered a lot of ground and people have listened to a lot of the stuff we've talked about. And what I'd like to do today, firstly, if you can just quickly introduce yourself for people who haven't listened, who've been sleeping under a rock, you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah. I'm Dr. Ted Naiman, primary care doctor here in the Pacific Northwest in the US. I've been in primary care for like 25 years. Super geeked out on diet and exercise and the practical implementation of diet and exercise for fat loss, muscle gain, health improvements, metabolic health, you name it. Basically, it's like diet, exercise, getting lean, building muscle. That's my thing.
Diet, exercise, getting lean, and building muscle. Love it. All right, we've hooked them now. That's it. It's showtime, Ted. Nah, nah. But
Perfect.
with that, right? So with diet, the diet element, I'd like to get straight into the carnivore, keto, low carb kind of space. That's a camp within itself, right? We have that a lot with nutrition. We have camps, but with you, what I love about your approach is it's more, I think, realistic for most people when you look at protein, the protein and energy diet, the PE diet, and satiety per calorie. So you tell the audience, I love your perspective on the difference between taking an approach where you're focusing more on protein, you're focusing more on satiety per calorie. In other words, eating good quality foods that actually keep you satiated, which are not overly calorie dense, so you overeat, versus just going low carb or carnivore or keto.
Right. So, well, first of all, a little bit of background. I have basically had a lot of experiences with religious type dieting, right? So I was raised Seventh-day Adventist, and everyone was basically vegetarian or vegan for religious purposes, eating meat's a sin or something crazy like that. I don't know. So for whatever reason, I was kind of susceptible to diet religions, right? I trained my for medical school. I went to Loma Linda University in Southern California. It's this famous blue zone mecca where everyone's plant-based, vegetarian, vegan, blah blah blah. I'm sure you have all the Adventist, Loma Linda meatless products in your grocery store, even there in Australia, right? So they have this big health message, meat's going to kill you. It's basically a sin, something. So I got sucked into a bunch of religious diets. I was paleo, I was low carb, I was keto, I was carnivore. Well, I started out plant-based, vegetarian, vegan, you name it. I've pretty much done them all. And I've been susceptible to fear-based diets where lectins are trying to kill you, phytates are trying to kill you, saturated fats trying to kill you. So a lot of religious, fear-based, dogmatic, kind of, I'm going to just say it, ignorant sort of dieting in my past. And I have spent a lot of time just pouring through the primary literature, right? Just reading all about what really moves the needle when it comes to diet and health. And I've also worked with thousands of real people in the real world. I basically work full time at this very moment as a primary care doctor, and had so many patient encounters now in my career. Because I'm into diet, I get this special group of patients coming to see me. Anyone who's geeked out on diet is basically coming to see me. And so I've had this endless stream of people who've tried all these diets, are sucked into all these diet religions, are in all these diet tribes, are doing all these fear-based or dogma-based diet religions where they're pure this or pure that. I mean, I've had everything from the potato hack to the Kempner rice diet to the Ray Pete just drink sugar and Mexican Coke and ice cream and orange juice. I've had you name it. I've had clients doing it. So I've really gotten to see what can work, what might be optimal, what might be possible. And all of this like brought me to where I'm at. Basically, Satiety Per Calorie, this book I wrote that kind of looks at absolutely everything from a really zoomed out perspective. And as it turns out, nobody has to be any of these diet religions. Now, there's a couple exceptions. There's always exceptions. If you have celiac disease, you really should be on a gluten-free diet, right? But the fact that somebody out there really benefits from a gluten-free diet does not mean that everybody else needs to be on a gluten-free diet. And in fact, that might be worse for them because they have fewer options and they're more limited. You know what I'm saying? So there's all these things out there that are possible, but they're not exactly optimal. It's possible to be a pure vegan, Is it optimal? No. It's possible to be a pure carnivore. Is that optimal? No. Are people forced to these extremes out of fear and ignorance and being sucked in by people around them, almost like a cult? Yeah, I'm gonna say they are. And I've been there. I totally get it. Full disclosure, I wrote the PE diet about 5 years ago, and it was kind of my own escape route from low carb dogma and basically low carb cultism. What I realized is that protein is the most important factor of all when it comes to ad lib caloric intake. As you raise the protein percentage of your diet, you automatically eat fewer and fewer calories because protein has such a high satiety per calorie. So protein's so satiating that if you nail your protein percent, you really don't have to worry about the carb and fat spectrum nearly as much. And it turns out that there are tons of, I mean, you know better than anybody, there are tons of bodybuilders and bikini models and aesthetic people and fitness people who are just very low fat, getting most of their non-protein energy from carbohydrate. And they're doing awesome as long as they absolutely nail that protein percentage. Once you dial that in, it does really come down to protein and calories. And carbs and fats is a little bit less important. It's more interchangeable. It's kind of like you can go one way or the other. There's a lot of seesaw room to like change your fuel mixture of non-protein energy. So the PE diet was like this kind of epiphany for me. Oh, hey, you don't have to be dogmatically low carb. You don't have to be keto. You don't have to be carnivore. You can actually eat more carbohydrate as long as you're eating less fat at the same time so that your overall protein percentage or protein energy ratio stays the same. And so that's how I kind of got started on the road to where I'm at is this protein to energy phenomenon, protein percentage, realizing carbs and fats are kind of interchangeable, and then zooming out even more to satiety per calorie, where uh, protein's important, sure, but also energy density and fiber and hedonics and all these other things play major roles as well. And once you look at all of these pieces, from a really zoomed out perspective, it kind of frees you from having to be one little thing. Like I just never eat carbs. I know low carb's good, so zero carbs is the best. So I'll just never eat carbs, and that's the box I'm locked into. And now that becomes who I am, and it's my whole persona, and now I'm really sucked in, and I basically will never change no matter how much evidence is out there to the contrary, or how many black sheep there are out there. So like, I mean, that's a really long answer to your question, but that's kind of how I got to where I'm at. Basically, trying to avoid fear-based, dogmatic mentalities that kind of lock you in to a cult or a silo, and freeing people up to mix and match these different techniques and have a lot more options.
Quick one, my friend. Free fat loss challenge is kicking off Monday, the 12th of May. You're going to lose 5 pounds of fat in 14 days, and you're going to work closely with me, and you're going to be part of the community. It'll be life changing for you. I'm not just going to teach you how to lose 5 pounds of fat in 14 days. I'm going to teach you how to keep it off. It'll be absolutely life changing, and it's free. And all you've got to do to enter is just click the link below, beneath in the show notes. Also, I'm going to be giving away the Shred Blueprint, which is also in the show notes. And this has helped loads of people drop fat real quick and also sculpt their body. I've also thrown in an ab guide in there. There's a training guide. There's a nutrition plan in there. Everything's in there, the Shred Blueprint, and that's also free. So both links are just beneath in the show notes. All right, let's get back to the episode with Dr. Ted Naiman. Thanks for sharing, man. That's so interesting. And I've been on a similar journey. I've tried them all the different diets. And it is, Ted, it is literally like in nutrition nowadays, religion. It can get so dogmatic. But going back to what you were saying there, so people will say low carb. I get this a lot because I've coached loads of people as well, hundreds over the years. Low carb works for me. So I'm always going to go back to that. Keto can't work for me. But a lot of the times they actually, for example, they'll gain the weight back they lost. But because they get so sucked into that camp, and it's very tribal, humans are very tribal by nature, right? They get sucked, and then they always want to go back to that. But what I find is they never really get to that next level. A lot of these people, they want to get to the next level. A lot of people listen to this with their physique, with their health. They might want to get shredded. A lot of the guys listening to this, but to get to that next level, that's when it comes down to kind of the fine tuning piece. And it comes down to adherence first and foremost. And I think without blowing our own trumpets, the level we're at with our physique now, and you could probably attest to this, it's just a byproduct now, right, of how we live. It's a healthy lifestyle. We like to eat to fuel our body. We enjoy the foods we eat as well, right? Every meal I have, and I'm sure the same as you enjoy the meal. I think a lot of people get a bit twisted there. They think, oh, they're so disciplined. They've got so much willpower, but actually we love the meals we eat. And it's empowering when you're kind of like just hitting a protein target, for example, consistently. That changes everything. But just going deeper into that, a lot of people will say, I had someone say recently, you got to get fat adapted, Ted. Right. So when you go in carnivore or keto, it takes 6 months to get fat adapted. And full transparency, Ted, I did carnivore for like a month before. And I think someone commented recently said, you need at least 3 months, using the excuse because I couldn't get enough calories in. I tested it out and I felt better having carbohydrates. They were like, it's an excuse. You need to do the 3 months to get fat adapted. So give us a little bit of a lowdown on that, Ted. I guess fats, getting fat adapted versus like a lot of people, most people, they do better when it comes to going back to what you were saying, optimal health, having some carbohydrates.
Yeah, and it's really there's a lot of seesaw action there. And the reality is there is no perfect diet. There's no ultimate solutions. There's just trade-offs. So the fat adaptation thing is cool. As you get more and more fat adapted, you can go longer and longer and longer between meals. So it's very easy for fat adapted people to just slip all the way down to one meal a day, one giant meal, tons of fat. It's great for low intensity, super long duration exercise. You can, run an ultra on no calories. You do get to this point where you're very, very good at using fat. But there's a major trade-off. First of all, the second you eat any carbohydrate, your blood sugar's in a diabetic range. This is normal mammalian physiology, right? So any mammal that's an obligate carnivore, like a cat or a dolphin, if they eat any carbohydrate at all, their blood sugar just immediately spikes into a diabetic range. And the same thing happens to very, very fat adapted humans. This is adaptive glucose sparing. It's a physiologic insulin resistance. It's kind of no big deal, but it further locks you in to this I can't eat carbs. You become very carb intolerant on purpose from your body's point of view, which is a cool party trick. And if you're living at a super high latitude, if you're in the Arctic and you're not getting carbs, for like a year, that's where you want to be. It's going to be great. And it is desirable, and it's just cool that your body can switch back and forth. But you lose out on that high end, right? You're not as good on the glycolytic side. Your ability to use glucose and do a lot of glycolytic stuff is not as optimal as it would be if you were somewhere more in the middle. And your blood sugar, if you put on your CGM, you're like, oh, I knew carbs were bad. Look at my blood sugar. I will never eat blueberries again. I'll never eat fruit of any kind. It's just nature's candy. And you really just get locked in even more. And so that's kind of the trade-off. Now, you can actually do the same thing with carbosis. You can feed any mammal just tons of dextrose. Just if they get most of their calories just from straight sugar, they will get more and more carb adapted. And you get to the point where you can eat a ton of carbohydrate without your blood sugar going up very much at all. And you actually get the reverse. And what's interesting is if you're super fat adapted, your fasting glucose is at the very, very upper end of the normal range. All of your zero carb, keto, carnivore people, when they wake up in the morning, their blood sugar is 99. Well, in the US, milligrams per deciliter, it's like different for you guys, but basically their sugar's at the highest end of the normal range versus someone who's in carbosis, they're running off of liver glycogen. And when they wake up in the morning, their blood sugar's at the very, very lowest end of the normal range. It doesn't really matter whether you're on the super high carb or the super low carb, your A1C is going to be the same. And we have a bunch of studies showing this, that you have the same 3 month glucose average, same hemoglobin A1C. And it's really more about just switching that hybrid engine and tuning it for one or the other. I'm really honestly, and I talk about this in the book a lot. There are these possibles on the extremes, but it's never really optimal. Optimal is always somewhere more in the middle. And anytime you have something that's super polarized, where there's somebody over here saying this is the best, and someone over here is like this is the best, you basically know the answer has to be somewhere right down the middle. And optimal is probably going to be closer to the middle than either end. So it's cool to see this physiology, but that doesn't mean that anybody has to do it. And again, in the book, I talk a lot about possible versus optimal. I also talked about validity does not equal necessity, right? So it's valid for somebody to do really, really well on a gluten-free diet if they have celiac disease. That does not mean it's necessary for everybody else, right? So validity does not equal necessity. It's valid that these people on your social media who are pure vegans or pure carnivore are crushing it. They're doing great. That's awesome. That does not mean that's necessary for everybody. It doesn't mean that you have to be carnivore, you have to be zero carb, keto, whatever, or plant-based or any of that. So you have to be like aware of the fact that just because people can do this and it works for them doesn't mean it's necessary for anybody else. And the answer is usually somewhere in between.
Absolutely. Somewhere in between. A lot of people do struggle with that though, right? With nutrition, because if you look at the average person, a lot of people have struggled with their weight. They've struggled with, because we have these foods now, which we've talked about before, right? Ultra processed foods kind of designed to make us overeat, right? We look at the energy per calorie and it's through the roof. And we can eat them very fast as well, a lot of these foods, which slows down the satiety as well. So going back to what you said there though about carbohydrates. So a lot of people, let's say, for example, low carbs, under 100 grams, or carnivore keto, they might be following that. As you say, it might be working for them at the moment. And then they're also with that camp as well. They'll be focused on, removing the seed oils, all those kind of things, right? So it's kind of comes with the territory. So I'm not going to go too far down that rabbit hole. What would you say, based on all the people, like thousands of people you've seen and stuff as well, with carbohydrates, and not all carbohydrates that you've talked about this, carbohydrates treated equally. So we've got the refined sugars, then we've got the potatoes, the rice, all that kind of stuff. Would you say, so from what you're saying, most people will do better generally with a decent amount of carbohydrates in their diet, as long as they're hitting protein? I know you said it doesn't matter as much with the fats and carbs, but as long as they're hitting protein, they're staying within a calorie range, for example, having a decent amount of carbohydrates would be okay for most. I know it's kind of a lot of variance from person to person, though.
I'm going to say that's probably optimal. And there's a bunch of reasons why. First of all, humans have a very real appetite for carbohydrate and for a good reason, right? You absolutely have to have a certain amount of glucose every day. There are a bunch of cell types in your body that don't have mitochondria, can't oxidize fat. You have to have glucose at all times. Your brain, that's important. Your neurons, there are cells in the kidney, cells in your eye. There are all these different cells, all of your red blood cells. They have to live on glucose. So you have to have a certain amount of glucose every day that's manufactured just to be alive. That is why humans have an appetite for carbohydrate. Now, you can eat no carbohydrates and just manufacture all that glucose the hard way, either from the glycerol backbone of triglycerides from fat or from protein, but that's not really protein sparing. That's not really optimal. It's a lot of hard work for your body. And then if you do any kind of glycolytic exercise volume on top of that, you're really behind the eight ball trying to get enough glucose, right? You have to make, 75 grams glucose just to be alive. You're making it out of protein. But then you want to play soccer for 2 hours and really burn a ton of glycogen. Where are you going to get that from? It literally takes you hours to replenish this the hard way, right? And so eating some carbohydrate makes a lot of sense just from a practical level. To get that glucose, you need to be alive. So I kind of like people to eat a certain amount of carbohydrate, so they don't have to use all their protein manufactured glucose, and then possibly earning their more carbs. So, you could burn up to a gram a minute with really high intensity exercise. So, if you're doing an hour of really hard, high end glycolytic cardio, you should probably eat another 60 grams of carbs or so. So I don't think anyone has to micromanage this, but the point is eating a moderate amount of carbohydrate. I'm not suggesting 300 grams a day, which is what the average American does. I'm saying maybe more like a gram per pound of ideal body weight, maybe 150 grams a day. A little more if you're doing a ton of cardio, a little less if you're ultra sedentary and never do any high-end exercise. But I find that this is a couple of things. Number one, it satisfies this natural craving and appetite for carbohydrates that humans have. So that is really helpful. And number two, it's protein sparing because you don't have to use all this dietary protein to basically make enough glucose. And a lot of people aren't eating enough protein to begin with. So I also find that people who are like, okay, I'm just going to be in denial that humans like to eat carbohydrates and want to eat carbohydrates, and we have an appetite for carbohydrate that's totally natural. It makes sense because we use a lot of glucose for our giant brains, and we descended from frugivores that just eat, a ton of fruit. So, like, I'm going to deny that that's even a thing. And I'm just going to go on a lifelong zero carb diet. What I see, almost no one can do that long term. Statistically, it's basically zero people. And the other thing is people lose a ton of weight on low carb and keto and carnivore, and then they just like slowly do this carb creep. That's basically universal. I've watched all these very dogmatic, lifers in the low carb, community. I just watch them slowly, steadily regain right back up to where they were. Just from like if you eat as much fat every day as you burn every day, you're not gonna lose a damn thing. And so it's basically just fat balance at that point. But then the whole time you have this carbohydrate craving in the background that you're never really acknowledging. So you're kind of like in trouble, basically. And there's a reason why everybody in the low carb world instantly loses 20 pounds, loves it, and then stalls out hard forever, or maybe slowly regains a little bit. There are some exceptions to that, but I find most of the exceptions are people who are actually eating a moderate amount of carbohydrate, maybe 100 grams a day or something like that, and they're not absolutely zero. I just don't think that that's optimal. Now, it is possible. People doing it. Possible. Doesn't mean it's optimal.
100%. A few things you said there. You said something earlier. Cool party trick. That was a CGM, right? So going back to the continuous glucose monitor, because again, a lot of people in that world, they end up using some tools like that, and then they'll see things like their blood sugar spike through the roof when they have a tiny bit of carbohydrates, and they'll say to themselves, "Wow, have you seen what happens to your blood sugar levels, Ted, when you have some of these foods? Insane." This is why, and it kind of it can cement in that belief even more that low carbs even better, right? So just quickly on
Right.
that topic, right, before I forget about continuous glucose monitors, all in all, what is your thoughts on that for most people using that as a tool? Would you recommend that to anyone or no, generally?
I mean, if you're a type 1 diabetic, it's life or death. I absolutely love CGMs for anyone who's diabetic, especially anyone on insulin. It's super critical. But if you're a healthy person who isn't diabetic, CGM is definitely going to lead you down the very low carb pathway. The final destination of anyone on a CGM who's afraid of even tiny little post-meal variations is basically no carbs at all ever. And then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy because you get even more and more resistant to carbohydrate. So you get even higher spikes from even trace amounts of carbohydrate. So it's kind of just like this slow, gradual slide into zero carb, keto, carnivore, which I find is kind of like not optimal. Basically, some variations in glucose is normal and healthy and good for you. If you just look at the CGM readouts and people doing high intensity exercise, it's going way up. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're energy toxic and damaging themselves. So if you have someone who's all of your pre-diabetes and type 2 diabetes is energy toxicity. You literally stored too much fat in your body, and the fuels in your bloodstream have no place to go. Your triglycerides go up really high, and then your glucose starts to go up, right? So you have no place to put all of this stuff. If you're if you're eating more and more fat, right, and you're not eating carbohydrate, all these fats in your bloodstream just go up. Your triglycerides, your free fatty acids, and even if your glucose isn't that crazy, you might still be energy toxic and having problems from prediabetes, insulin resistance, and all of these things, even if your glucose isn't spiking up crazy high. And also, if you're fully diabetic, most of the damage is occurring honestly from lipotoxicity, fat toxicities, and the glucose is bad, but what's the underwater part of the iceberg there is the energy toxicity, mostly from too much fat in your body. So if you look at the total amount of glucose in anybody's body, it's pretty small. You got 300 grams glucose in your muscle, 100 grams in your liver, and like 5 grams in your bloodstream. That's it. Boom. Look at a type 2 diabetic whose blood sugar is crazy high. They have 300 grams of glucose in their muscle, 100 grams in their liver, and 10 grams of glucose in their bloodstream. Like, if you look at the amount of carbohydrate and glucose in the body of an uncontrolled diabetic with severely high blood sugars, It's a couple of grams higher than you or me. The difference is they have just a shit ton of fat in their body, like out of control. Every fat cell's at its maximum diameter. They filled up all their subcutaneous fat. Now they filled up their visceral fat. Now they filled up their liver and their pancreas. And only after you've completely filled your muscle with intramuscular triglycerides, all your fat cells, your visceral fat, your liver, after all these muscles and organs and storage depots are filled with fat, then the glucose starts going up in your bloodstream. And then you're diabetic and you really just have 5 extra grams of glucose in your whole body compared to a non-diabetic. So the underwater part of this type 2 diabetes iceberg is just like a massive amount of overfatness and energy toxicity from overfatness. And the other fuels in the bloodstream, like the triglycerides and the free fatty acids, these are actually just as dramatic as the glucose or more so, except we don't have a little CGM for free fatty acids and triglycerides and other fat-based fuels in your bloodstream. You know what I'm saying? If we did, we'd be like, oh, shoot, I shouldn't eat so much fat. What the hell? So like it's kind of not fair.
100%. There's so much you said there that I want to touch on. And with people, you said about carb creepers earlier. So some people, they'll go back to old behaviors, right? So what they'll do, they'll go low carb. And this is not attacking carnivores and low carb, right? We're just trying to, get some different perspectives here. And I see the same thing a lot. They do, and it's not from eating potatoes and berries, right? I've never heard one person say, I went low carb or carnivore. Before you know it, then I started gaining weight. What they'll say is, I started eating carbs again, and then my weight started going up. But it's never potatoes and berries, for example, and then I was back to square one, right? It's refined sugars, it's processed foods, which a lot of people, number one, when they switch over to these diets, they're having really low protein, right, Ted? And then they ramp the protein up, and then boom, they're more satiated. Naturally, they start losing weight, and they start eating less calories. Because again, going back to what you said, just to clarify, when protein and calories are equated for, right? Fats and carbs make no difference to body composition, to fat loss. Just to clarify that for the audience, unless I've missed something there.
Oh, no, you haven't. But I would put one caveat on there. I
Go.
have seen some carb creep people have an issue with eating whole unrefined carbs and then putting a bunch of refined fat on it. Like I've seen this carb creep with people eating a bunch of berries, but then just putting tons of heavy cream, whipped cream, whatever, some refined fat on it. Or eating a potato, baked potato, but putting a bunch of butter and sour cream and things like that on there. So I think you could have a carb creep with unrefined carbs, but add a bunch of refined fat to it and kind of have the same sort of not optimal outcome. If you've been led to believe that fat's totally fine, fat's a free food, it's the carbs that's the problem. So you're like trace carbs from berries and then like a 50 gallons of heavy whipping cream on top. We're gonna blame those carbs as like that's what caused it. You know what I'm saying? So I think you could have some carb creep with natural carbs if you're just freebasing the fat. If you're just like, oh, fat's fine. I open my fridge and it's just like butter, heavy cream, and that's it. You know what I'm saying? You're gonna have a problem with carb creep because you're adding refined fats to it. So yeah, so I'm gonna say like, yes, the problem is refined carbs or refined fats. What are the other or even both?
I just thought of something there when you said freebase and fast, right? I was thinking of people like literally smoking like butter on a pipe. You know what I'm saying? That's a weird image in my head.
Exactly.
It just,
Hmm.
but that I'm so glad you cleared that up because that's where I was going with it. But I went a little bit off track there in terms of the fat. So when they're having these foods, yes, they might be having more berries and more good quality foods or whatever, but then they're adding in the extra fats. And it's very simple. There's like 9 calories in a gram of fat versus 4 calories in a gram of protein, 4 calories in a gram of carbohydrates, right? Have I got that right, Ted?
Right.
There and about?
Absolutely.
Yep. So they're adding the fats in and they think fats is like a free food, going back to what you said, keto, and maybe they haven't tracked as well, right? Tracked food before a lot of the time. So they're not aware. They're just not aware of even adding olive oil, for example. Have a tablespoon of olive oil is good for you, right? Antioxidants, blah, 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 really good Mediterranean diet. You know the approach, and they're adding it in, and they don't realize over the space of a week it's probably over 1,000 calories just in oil they weren't accounting for or weren't even aware of, or bulletproof coffees, right, where they added butter into the coffees, those kind of things, and all that adds up to a lot of calories, which literally could be the difference for a lot of people between losing fat or gaining it or staying the same, right? But you mentioned then about I want to go deeper into the carbohydrate and fat thing, right, in terms of converting into body fat. There's some research to show that fat, for example, can convert, has a higher efficiency rate of converting into body fat than, for example, definitely more than protein, but also more than carbohydrates. Now, I know, Ted, that's kind of splitting hairs because calories are the most important thing, right? Are you in a calorie surplus? If you're eating more than you're burning, you're going to gain weight, the end. But what would you say on that? Is there a difference there in terms of the conversion to fat?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's two things people need to know. First of all, fat's easily stored as fat. Like it's the easiest thing ever. The thermic effect of fat is only 3% of the calorie. Basically, it takes 20% of your protein calories just to deal with protein, right? To basically strip off the amino group and deaminate it. And by the time you're done processing the protein, you've lost a lot of calories to digestion. And the same thing is true of carbohydrate. If you're trying to store them as fat, it's quite expensive. You lose about 15% of the calories if you're trying to convert carbs into fat and then store them. Not really true with fat. Fat's very passive. It's very easy to store. It's actually the easiest macro to just store as fat. Doesn't really cost you hardly any of the calories. It's super easy to go from dietary fat to stored fat. Carbohydrates a little different. If there's room in your muscle for glycogen, those carbs get sucked out of your bloodstream and your muscle grabs them pretty hungrily, especially if you have a ton of muscle and you've done any kind of glycogen depletion workout, your muscles just hoover the glucose right out of your bloodstream on the first pass. None of that's going to end up as fat. You have to super saturate your muscular glycogen, and only then are you going to start storing some of it as fat. So you literally have to eat hundreds of grams of carbohydrates. Your average moderately active person is going to have to eat 500 grams of carbohydrate. Then they're going to actually start performing de novo lipogenesis and converting into fat. But that is going to be more calorically expensive than just storing fat as fat, which is super easy. So there's a couple of reasons why carbohydrates a little safer if you're trying to be as lean as possible, which is why 99% of the bodybuilders out there are literally more worried about fat grams than they are carbohydrate grams for a very good reason. Because, most of your bodybuilders and bikini models and fitness people, as you well know, you're depleting a lot of glycogen doing these very, very high-end resistance training to failure. You have some room in your muscle for that carbohydrate. Like it's going someplace, right? Not really true of fat. Like pretty much every bit of fat you eat ends up in your fat cells, where it may or may not leave later if you're on the Stairmaster for an extra hour or two. So that's why, your bikini models are keeping the peanut butter in the freezer so they can only just chip out a couple little grams of it, because otherwise they'll eat the whole jar, right? It's the fat that you're really worried about. And somehow we got into this like carbohydrate insulin model where, well, because fat doesn't spike your blood sugar or your insulin, you can't, it's basically fine. You're not going to get fat from fat. And that's just kind of not true. So we lost the plot somewhere in there a little bit in the low carb world. And I was a super low carb guy forever. So I'm just as guilty of that sort of thing as anybody. So I can't really throw a bunch of rocks at other people because I was totally there.
And I wanted to touch on that, Ted, as well, because as you know, I've competed quite a few times. That's a thing of the past now. I did like 9 bodybuilding comps all together. And just what you said then, right? And I've talked to my audience on this on YouTube. That's what I would do. If I was looking to get, like a lot of people looking to get really lean or shredded and achieve that in a way where I'm not going to feel like I'm dying along the way. I'm going to have a good amount of energy when I'm training, for example. I'm going to have adequate recovery and everything else. What I'm going to do is I'm going to minimize the fats, like you said. I'm going to have enough. So what I did, for example, on my last comp, I looked at my fitness pal thing, right? Actually, the other day, I think it was 35% fat I was having, like leading up to it, up until about a month before. I was kind of pushing it more towards the higher end, 35, maybe even 40%, because I can get away with a lot of calories, right? Ted, I got a lot of muscle mass, which burns a lot of calories. And also I'm the guy who prefers to move more and eat more, when it leads up to comp. So I was doing like 15,000 steps a day. But then a month before, I'm taking the fats down, keeping the carbs up. So the carbs are up are about 300 grams. And going back to what you said then, because I was super lean, I can have a lot of carbohydrates, very insulin sensitive, a lot of room in the muscle cells, liver cells, right, to store when I'm having the carbohydrates. So I ramped that up to like five. I'm not saying people should do this, like 500, 600 grams. And because I was super lean, filled the muscles out, always felt good. So I think people need to they need to revisit that when they're looking to get lean. You have got to look at the ripple effect of bringing your carbohydrates down, right? For example, Ted, is it true, right? When you have, if you could just quickly touch on this, there's a certain amount of protein if you have, it could be 1.5, 1.25 grams per pound of body weight or whatever it is. If you go over that, the literature shows really there's not a great deal of benefit. Would you communicate it that way with like fats as well? And how would you communicate that with carbohydrates in general? Because I know there are a lot of benefits from having a decent amount of carbs for a lot of people, right? Depending on what the goal is, of course.
Absolutely. And I talk about this a lot in the book. So I basically look at each macro, and there's this sort of like, there's this U-shaped curve where you can live with way less or way more, but you have very diminishing returns. And the sweet spot is somewhere in the middle. And honestly, with all three macros, it's about the same. You don't want to go below 20% of any of the macros. You really don't. You don't want to go above about 40%, right? So like protein, 20 to 40%. You don't really want to go below about 20% protein. If you look at all the, if you look at the National Weight Loss Registry, this is anyone who's lost more than 30% of their body weight and kept it off for 2 years. Like anybody who's a successful dieter, they're all getting their protein up to like 19, 20% minimum. And then if you're a bodybuilder, you're living more up like 30%. If you're in show prep, you might be 40%. You might be even higher than that, just peak week, the very last week or two. So this 20 to 40% protein is amazing. Like if you don't, but going higher, it's basically you're just going to be starving all the time because you can't get enough energy calories from protein because the thermic effect, the cost of digestion is too high. But going lower is probably going to be a fail because you need this protein to have as much lean mass as possible. Carbs is the same way. 20 to 40%. If you're going under 20% carbs, you're really losing out on all these satiety benefits from fiber. If you're not eating enough carbohydrate to get 20% of your calories, you're probably not getting enough fiber. That means you're leaving money on the table when it comes to satiety per calorie. All this soluble fiber is super satiating for hardly any calories. And there are also micronutrients that carb foods have that meat kind of doesn't. Like all of my pure carnivores, a little bit lower on folate, a little bit lower on magnesium, a little bit lower on thiamine. This is just the way it works. Vitamin C, like you're probably going to have a nutritional penalty if you're trying to go lower than 20% of your diet from carbohydrate, not to mention this appetite for carbs that humans naturally have. But then if I'm going over 40%, I'm kind of like diminishing returns there too. You can go on the Kempner rice diet and get, 60% of your you can be a fruitarian like these crazy vegans on YouTube, and you can basically get like 60, 70, 80% of your calories from carbs, but it's really diminishing returns because you also need some fat and you also need all this protein, right? So fat's the same way. Nobody is going below 20% of calories from fat, even in bodybuilding prep. Like you just don't go below 20%. Your testosterone's going to nosedive. You're not going to get enough fat soluble vitamins. You might be at risk for essential fatty acid deficiency because you have to have essential fatty acids. So it's a real mistake to shave any macro less than 20%, but it's a mistake also to go over 40%. Like if I'm going to get more than 40% of my calories from fat, that's kind of just dumb because I'm really taking away from protein, which is what I want to support my lean mass, and then carbs so I can do this high-end glycolytic training and things like that. So uh, while it's possible to eat way more than 40% from either fat or carbs or even protein, it's not optimal. While it's possible to shave even lower than 20% on carbs, fat, or protein, not optimal. So all three of your macros, boom, 20 to 40% of calories. Like probably a mistake to go higher or lower than that on any of them. And that's why I really like to look at the big picture. You know what I mean? Putting all your money in the carb basket or the fat basket or even the protein basket, probably a mistake. And somewhere in between is kind of optimal. That's why all of your bodybuilding splits are going to be a 40, 30, 40, 40, 40, 30, 40, 30, 30. They're like you're doing something in the 20 to 40 range with your macros percentage wise pretty much all of the time. Same thing is true when it comes to grams per pound of ideal body weight, right? Like you don't really want to go less than, you know, 0.75 grams per pound of ideal body weight. That's like 1.6 grams per kilo of ideal body weight.
Protein,
Um,
yeah.
right, with protein. And you don't really, and then going way higher than like maybe 1.25 grams or around 3 grams per kilo of ideal body weight, you're probably just wasting your time there too as well. So there's really a sweet spot for all three of them. If you're looking at absolute grams per pound of ideal body weight or kilo of ideal body weight or percentages, there's this U-shaped curve. And in the book, I have these pictures and these graphs, the U-shaped curves, exactly where you want to be, both absolute grams of carbs, fat, and protein in terms of ideal body weight, and also percentages of calories, and you kind of want to be in the middle. Like all of this polarized stuff is possible, but not optimal. So throughout the book, I talk about this U-shaped curve where there's a kind of a sweet spot zone that's fairly wide. You have lots of room to move back and forth and individualize it, but you really don't want to be down at the ends. It's just not optimal.
Yeah, man, makes a lot of sense. Right, I want to quickly get into the fiber real quick and nutrition in terms of nutrients that you get from food. You mentioned about magnesium, vitamin C. That's a big one. A lot of people in I'm going to keep going at I'm not going at the carnivore space personally here, right? We're just having an open conversation. But people in the carnivore space, they'll argue that with, I don't need as much vitamin C because I absorb it better. When you have a bunch of carbs with it, it cancels out a lot of the vitamin C. There's still things like that. And then fiber, going back to what you said, by the way, my best friend when I'm getting shredded for comps is potatoes. So I'm having a lot of fiber from potatoes. I'm having some vegetables as well, but mainly potatoes. And I'm having my meat, chicken thighs. I can get away with more fat because of my calorie intake, or chicken breast, right? Is the typical. But those two things together with the fiber that I'm getting from the potatoes, and I'm getting carbohydrates into the tank as well, which I'm going to get some benefit from. It never used to fail me, right? So, it's a couple of things just to wrap this up. Then, so fiber. Would you? Because a lot of people say you don't need fiber; it's not an essential nutrient in that space. And then things like vitamin C and nutrients. Is it likely that number one, not having enough fiber is not going to be optimal for a lot of people in that space with the carnivore, and number two, that they're going to end up with little nutrient deficiencies or suboptimal amounts of nutrients like vitamin C and magnesium you touched on there?
Yeah, absolutely. So the fiber thing. Humans eat until they get two things. Number one, enough protein. Protein leverage. We have all these studies. You're basically going to eat and eat and eat until you get enough protein, and only then are you going to stop. This is conserved in pretty much all animals. You eat until you get enough protein. So protein's huge. The second thing you do, though, is eat until you get a certain weight and volume of food, right? So basically, humans eat like 1.5 to 2 kilos of food a day no matter how many calories are in there, more or less. That's 3 or 4 pounds of food a day. You're just going to eat this certain mass and weight and volume of food. The weight comes from water, so foods that are higher in water are more beneficial. The mass and volume comes from fiber, right? So you basically want to eat as much protein, water, and fiber as possible so you can get the amino acids from protein for satiety, the weight from water, and then the volume from fiber. So you're kind of leaving money on the table if you're eating no fiber at all. The volume of your food is much smaller, and you're not getting this stretch receptor phenomenon in the small intestine, in the stomach. That's where you get all your GLP-1 release. You know what I'm saying? You get a ton of, like, let's say you eat 10 pounds of asparagus. It takes so long to digest. It mechanically distends the lower small intestine, and that's where all your GLP-1 comes from. All the K cells down there release all this natural GLP-1. So you could basically, if you can't afford Ozempic, the diet plan is eat, a pound of skinless chicken breast and a pound of asparagus an hour before each meal 3 times a day. You're so full from the weight and the volume of the protein. You're just not hungry at all. Your intestines are like, okay, do not eat anything else. We've got like all of this asparagus in here. It's going to take us all day to digest it. So you are officially not hungry. That's what GLP-1 is. And you get a lot of that from fiber. If you decide, well, fiber is not essential, it's totally true. Fiber is not essential, but it gives you a crazy bang for your buck, satiety per calorie. Like your soluble fibers, maybe 2 calories per gram. Insoluble fiber can be as low as 0 calories per gram. So overall, you're getting like 1 calorie per gram from this fiber, and it's giving you a ton of satiety. So it's a huge mistake to just never eat any. If let's say we're both carnivore and we both eat a ribeye, but then I eat some high fiber vegetables, so I just eat a whole head of lettuce, right? Which of us is going to end up eating less calories at the end of the day? I think we both know. So just never eating fiber is a big mistake. Now, on the micronutrient piece, I'm literally seeing patients all day, every day who are in extreme diet camps, pure carnivores, pure vegans. And there are certain nutritional deficiencies that are very associated with these two states, right? So, like, if you look at hemoglobin, right? Hemoglobin is this really important molecule in animals in general. And it's centered around an iron atom. So you're just automatically getting a lot of iron when you eat hemoglobin in animals. Now, on the plant side, there's a similar molecule, and that's chlorophyll. And it is at the center of your chlorophyll is a magnesium atom. So when you're eating plants and chlorophyll, you're automatically getting a ton of magnesium. I definitely see iron deficiency in my vegans and low magnesium in my carnivores. This is just a thing. And oh, wait a second, humans are scientifically omnivores, full stop. This is like a scientific fact. And it turns out if you eat like some of both, you're like optimal, right? So again, a U-shaped curve, possible to be pure vegan, possible to be pure carnivore, not optimal on either end. Somewhere in the middle is really good.
All right, my man. So I want to get into the book now. I want to get into the book to wrap this up. But one thing I've got to say, right, Ted? Our plan's trying to kill you.
So I used to, for years, I didn't eat legumes, right? I didn't eat lentils. I didn't eat chickpeas. I didn't eat legumes because I heard that like they're not paleo and, they've got phytates and lectins and blah, blah. It turns out if you cook those suckers, you're fine. That completely denatures all of this sort of thing. You don't have to be afraid of it. And now I'm just pushing back hard on any kind of fear mongering and fear based diet. So much of people's dieting is fear based. It's like, oh, I'm afraid of this and I'm afraid of that and I'm afraid of 10 other things. And it's such a like wuss place to be, right? I don't want to be afraid of these things anymore. I'm literally not afraid of lentils anymore. And I'm super embarrassed that I ever was. Like, that's just not very intelligent. So, like, I'm really trying to push away from all the fear-based stuff. And, plants, everything's trying to kill you. Nothing wants to be eaten, right? Plants don't want to be eaten, animals don't want to be eaten. They'll all kill you if they get the chance. But it turns out if you just cook that stuff, if you like, kill an animal and then cook your plants, you're basically fine.
Awesome, man. That's a great way to summarize this conversation, Ted. Let's talk about Satiety Per Calorie, your new book. And I'd love to know just what you think people, one idea in the book that you think people kind of need to hear, and why people need to get your book. I'm definitely going to put this in the show notes and everything else. But I know this is, and everything you've talked about, right? You referred to the book a few times. I already know it's going to be simplified for people in the book because a lot of people, they can get all this information, but the implementation is the hard thing. But I already know this book's going to help with that.
Yeah, the book, well, first of all, the book is it's pretty comprehensive where it basically the tagline is eating solved. And I started at the very beginning. What is eating? How does it work? Where do all the macros come from? What do they do in your body? Where are they stored? Um, and then I'm like, how did eating break? How did refining carbs and refining fats just make everybody gain a zillion pounds and become diabetic and have metabolic syndrome? And then I talk about, okay, how are we gonna fix this? How are we gonna reverse all this? And we basically just reverse engineer the whole thing, looking at all these factors like protein leverage and protein percent of calories, like energy density, the weight and volume of your food, fiber, water, protein, all of the factors that give you more satiety for less calories. It turns out if you're a little bit low carb, a little bit low fat, a little bit high protein, a little bit high fiber, and you pay attention to all these levers at once, you get the very, very most bang for your buck, and you end up at this optimal, middle point on that U-shaped curve. And so this book is basically knowledge and empowerment to allow anybody out there to escape from any sort of like monofocused, dogmatic, fear-based diet religion where I can't eat carbs or I can't eat fat or I can't eat this or that. No, you can actually do a little bit of all those things and zoom way out and get the big picture and then pick and choose the levers you want to pull. And it turns out that exercise and diet are also like this yin yang seesaw trade-off thing where you don't want to just be working on your diet or just be working on exercise. You actually want both of them together. So there's a ton of exercise stuff in the book. Why you absolutely have to worry about diet and exercise together and the basically how hard it's going to be if you just pull one of those levers for the other. Also, when it comes to exercise, we talk about cardio versus resistance and why you absolutely have to do both of them, and it's a mistake to only focus on one or the other. And so it's really holistic, and it really just like you walk away realizing, oh, hey, all this stuff is right down the middle, and it's good to be aware of all this because it frees you up, gives you a lot of freedom. Like you don't have to be locked into any particular pattern or dogma or camp or group or any of that stuff.
If you want 20% off both of Dr. Ted Naiman's books, all you've got to do is use the code Martin Silver at the checkout. I put the link for his books in the show notes. His new one is Satiety Per Calorie. Honestly, it says on their Diet Solve, this is the ultimate nutrition and diet book, the best in the world, literally. I wouldn't say that if I didn't believe it. You need to get that book if you want to get into the shape of your life. You want to learn about nutrition. You want to add years to your life and life to your years. So use the code in capital letters, Martin Silver. I put it beneath in the show notes anyway for his new book, Satiety Per Calorie, but also for the PE Diet, his previous book. You'll get 20% off both of those. Awesome, man. Yeah, I'm going to share this into the show notes, and people need to get this if you're looking to really level up with your health, longevity, your physique, of course, right? You're naturally going to improve the way your body looks when it comes to you simplifying things and getting more towards the middle, which is, by the way, it's taken Ted and I a long time to get to that point, right? And I'm still veering back towards the middle. You can see, I've got the carnivore books there behind me, right? I've read it all. I've applied it all, you know what I'm saying? And I've played around with things. And then it's funny how I always end up kind of coming back down to the middle now. Should probably eat more greens, but just so everyone knows, right? Ted and I have been there to the extremes, and Ted is obviously an expert in this field, right? So you got to get that book. I'll share it below. Where else can they find you, Ted?
Well, I'm on all the socials at Ted Naiman. And the book, you can go to satietypercalorie.com or just anywhere books are sold. I am selling the book on Gumroad, and I have a money back guarantee where if this is not the single best book you've ever read on the general principles of diet and exercise, you get a full refund. With the caveat that you have to tell me which book was better so I can read it because, hello, I want to read a book that's better than this. I honestly offered the same guarantee on the PE diet, and to this day, I haven't heard which book is better than that on the general principles. This book is better than the PE diet, and so it's check it out. If you don't like it, just let me know what was better.
Can't get any more conviction than that. You know what I mean? If you show me a better book, you get your money back.
Yep, absolutely.
Love it, man. Awesome stuff. Hey, thanks again for coming on, Ted, man. Always enjoy speaking to you. The only issue I have when I'm talking to you is I'm like, we're running out of time. Shit. What I've got to end up picking. I've got to pick it because it's like, no, you gotta stay on track here because there's so much I could pick your brain on. But I think that was gold for the audience. So thank you very much, my man.
Oh no, man. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Great to talk to you.
Great to talk to you too. I'll share obviously your handles and stuff in the show notes with the book as well in terms of Instagram and YouTube and stuff. So thanks again, man.
Thank you.
Cheers, Ted.